Friends, today I'm bringing you an opening that's going to help you win a ton of games. It's super easy to play for starters, and on top of that, it's going to give you amazing results because people don't know how to play against it. That's the most important thing of all. We've seen this opening on the channel before, but today we're going to dig a little deeper. We're talking about the bishop's opening, bishop to c4. Alright, we're used to this, right? We're used to playing knight to f3 first to attack this pawn and keep up the initiative, but bishop to c4 right away is almost never seen in any game. That's why it hides so many secrets and has a lot of advantages, not having developed this knight to f3. We'll see why in a moment. So how do we play after bishop to c4? Well, the most typical response from black is to play knight to f6. Why? Well, logically, they're developing one of their four minor pieces, and most importantly, they're threatening this pawn right here. In other words, it's the only developing move that keeps the initiative, because it forces us to defend the e4 pawn. That's why it's the most commonly played move. How should we defend this pawn? The move we're going to use is d3. Simply put, we've developed our bishop. Now we can play d3 because we're no longer blocking its path. Plus, we're opening up the way for our other dark square bishop. Now I'm going to explain the plans we have in this opening because you're really going to like them, even for playing in your own tournaments. A totally logical move for black here is bishop to c5. In fact, players with less than 2000 elo or even less than 1800 elo usually always make the same moves. Knight to f6, bishop to c5, as if it were an Italian opening, right? That's why these two moves are the most common. Careful, they're good moves. They're developing naturally. We're gonna keep developing this knight here, knight to c3. Remember well when you play this bishop opening. For now, don't develop the knight to f3, but rather the knight to c3. Why? Because we usually have two main plans that you need to remember in this opening. First would be the move f4, okay? If the knight is on f3, we wouldn't be able to make this advance, and the other plan would be the bishop pin with bishop to g5. We can use these two plans as it suits us. For example, if they castle right away here, a really strong move is bishop to g5, pinning this knight on f6. You can't imagine just how good this move is. By not having developed the knight to f3, we've gained a tempo. Because now we're threatening to jump with the knight to d5, putting a ton of pressure on this knight on s6. This definitely looks extremely dangerous for the black pieces, since it's really tough for them to defend. I mean, if this pawn were on d6, they could play the knight from b to d7. But since this pawn isn't on d6, they can't come to defend this knight. So if they play d6, we could immediately bring in this knight to put a ton of pressure. A ton. If they then play knight to d7, our plan would be to keep up the pressure, and now I'm going to explain it to you. But first of all, you need to know something that's going to give you goosebumps. What happens if they try to kick out this bishop? It does seem pretty logical, right? If they kick out this bishop, well, we could play bishop to a4, a very natural move to keep it pinned. However, here we have a wonderful move, the classic fishing pole with h4. In this opening, it works really well. Raymond, it works really well, but why? Because without the knight on f3, we have a clear path for the queen to join the attack. Very good idea. So why, Chestershire, are we giving away the bishop? Can you explain it to me? Well, simply put, if they capture this bishop, just so we're clear, if they don't capture it, then the pin stays active and they haven't achieved anything with the move h6. It's that simple, right? So what happens then if they capture? We recapture with the pawn, a takes g5, and now we're threatening this knight, the knight that was the real defender of the king side. Not only does it defend the h7 square, but it also covers these two squares, which are the entry points for the queen. So the knight is under threat, and when it moves, the winning move is queen to h5, creating a powerful battery, rook and queen attacking the knight, a knight that's going to end up falling. And not only that, but here we're going to deliver checkmate anyway. But they slip up, obviously we checkmate, but usually they'll try to escape. They can't escape with this pawn thanks to our bishop. Do you see it? This pawn is pinned. They might try to escape with the rook, so that when we capture, they can run with the king, and then when the queen comes over here, keep running with the king. So there's a way to finish things off very easily. Remember this well. When they try to escape with the rook, all you have to do is play queen takes f7. It's important to capture here before taking the knight, forcing the king to move over here. And the simplest way to finish is to sacrifice our rook for the knight. Rook takes h7, check, forcing the black king to capture, and now, thanks for a bishop, queen to h5 would be checkmate, since the king can't escape either behind or in front. It's not simple. e4, e5, we first play bishop to c4. It's important to bring out the bishop first. Knight to f6, we defend the pawn with d3, bishop to c5, and now knight to c3. Remember well, if they castle here, the winning plan is bishop to g5. But what happens if they don't castle? Let's say, for example, they play the move d6, one of the moves I see most often in this position. Since they've already developed their knight and bishop, now they want to develop their other bishop and knight, and the move d6 seems perfect. It defends the central point, opens the way for the light squared bishop, they can castle on the next move. Everything about this seems perfect. However, this is where a plan with f4 comes in, a really strong plan. Don't worry, even if you forget the ideas or mix up the terms, if you try moves like bishop to g5 or things like that, you'll still be doing just fine. This opening is played in a very comfortable way. However, here, the strongest plan of all when they play d6 against you, which, as you know, is a very popular setup for black, is that f4 is an extremely strong move. What does f4 threaten? Well, the threats here are simple, and in fact, we have two. One would be to capture here, for example, play knight to f3 and put a lot of pressure on this pawn here. Pay attention to the great move we have by not having developed our knight yet, because if we had developed this knight, the pawn would not be able to advance, right? With the pawn on f4, we can place the knight behind it, and both pieces are putting a lot of pressure on the e5 square, gaining a lot of space that way. Additionally, we can castle, castle, and place our rook on this file together with the bishop to put tremendous pressure with all the pieces on this point. All right, so that's one threat, right? To capture. Another threat is to advance. In this way, we trap the bishop on c8, which can't get out past d7. And not only that, but we also gain a huge space advantage on the king side, right? So we have two clear threats. The first would be to capture, and the second to advance. That's why a lot of people decide to capture. But if they capture, they would simply leave us with a huge development advantage. We've developed both our bishops to excellent squares. Then we'll play knight to f3 and castle, and once again we'll have the rook on a super favorable spot. So here, what's the move I see most often? When I play f4, well, the move I see most often isn't to capture or to let themselves be captured or anything like that. The move I see most often is knight to g4, a move that at first glance, they always try to play at stuff. A lot of people are tempted to try this typical attack, kind of like the fried liver, right? Or like what's the name of this attack again? The Fatello attack, right? Knight to f2, attacking the queen and also the rook. What they don't know is that this attack isn't a good one against the bishop's opening. They probably think we're playing something weird. We haven't developed the knight, we haven't castled, and we've got a pawn here in a strange way. They might think we're doing weird things, but actually, the ones playing strangely are them. They're throwing their pieces out of coordination. They only have two, and with just two, they're not going to accomplish anything. We continue with the brilliant move f5. Why is it so important? To throw the opponent's pieces out of coordination. It doesn't matter if they try to go for the Fatello attack, attacking the queen and the rook, because at this point, it's already too late. Our pieces are well coordinated, and the queen and bishop can join the attack, while their pieces can't get in anywhere. Here, this is how it would go. They attack our queen and our rook, but we bring the queen to h5. It's already too late for our opponent to defend. Thanks to our bishop on c4, perfectly placed, we're threatening checkmate in one. They can't move forward because they're pinned. Pushing forward here would be a huge mistake, because after capturing, you couldn't recapture with the h-pawn, since the rook is completely pinned. You'd have to recapture with the g-pawn, leaving the king totally exposed on the file, and the line would end up being lost. That's why here, the most common move to stop this threat is short castling. At first glance, it seems like a good move, right? The king and the rook are both defending those 2 points, but it's already too late. There's no way to stop the attack from the white pieces. How should we continue? Well, here, the strongest response we have is the following. We bring one of our remaining pieces into the attack, gaining tempo. Bishop to g5, directly attacking this queen on d8, which really only has two squares to go to, right? Queen to d7 or queen to e8, it really doesn't matter to us where she goes. It makes absolutely no difference because we have a clear dynamic advantage. That is, our pieces, pay attention, knight, bishop, bishop, and queen are all attacking the enemy king. While it's true they could capture our rook, they could do whatever they want, but even so, we're already winning. Now we bring in the last piece we have, knight to e5. Many might think we're attacking this point, but no. What we're actually doing is, well, it doesn't matter what they do. Look, they have a rook and an extra knight. However, we have so much attacking power that they can't do anything. The winning move here is a double exclamation mark move. Whenever you want, you can pause the video to try to guess it. I'll give you 3 seconds if you want to practice. And the key move is knight to f6, double exclamation mark. Obviously, this knight must be captured for two reasons. It's giving check, it's going to take the queen, and it's going to deliver checkmate. No matter what, this knight must be captured, and once it's taken, there's no direct check, but there's the move bishop takes f6, pinning the enemy king, and simply, there's no move that can stop this check, and then the mate on g7. For example, knight to d6 attacking the bishop doesn't matter to us. Queen to g5 check, and queen to g7 is checkmate. If you're more aggressive players, I recommend that when they play knight to f6 attacking this pawn, instead of the move we just mentioned, d3 defending, you go for a very interesting line that I once talked about on the channel, though not in as much depth. The move is d4. Very, very, very interesting. It's true, we're not defending this e4 pawn and they can capture it. But this is a mistake, my friends, because after pawn takes pawn, d takes e5, this knight is going to be hard to get out. This knight is hard to retreat. For example, these two squares. They're defended by our awesome pawn on e5. Here it's covered by the bishop, here by the pawn. Here it's not covered by anything, but they'd have serious problems with threats. That is, if they tried to retreat now, we could come here and threaten a lot, right? This knight is in trouble. So here, the most commonly played move according to the database is bishop to c5. Again, very interesting. I'm not gonna lie, they're threatening this f2 square again. Thanks to these videos, you're starting to lose your fear of these kinds of threats, right? A lot of you are probably thinking here that you should play, for example, bishop to d3 or knight to a3, right? Trying to defend against this attack from the black pieces. However, a lot of times we just focus on defending when in reality we have advantageous attacking positions ourselves. For example, let me give you an example here, Gopet. You could sacrifice the bishop on f7, check, and now bring in the queen and you would win back this knight. So you'd be up a pawn, and not only that, but your opponent's king would be completely exposed. This would be an example where you could win without having to defend this point here. However, sometimes there are even stronger attacks that don't require sacrificing any pieces. For example, playing queen to d5 directly in some lines of the Scotch Gambit. Those of you who have studied it know that this battery with queen on d5 is extremely powerful. We're threatening checkmate and attacking our knight. The in-between move doesn't work. For example, knight to g5 to defend doesn't work, because we would just take it and then go into f7. That's why here, for example, block has to castle. But what happens if they try to tassel? We can keep attacking. And how can we keep attacking? Well, for example, we could capture this knight here. Alright, you'd be surprised to know what the most common move is here for black. The most common move of all is, before castling, capturing and giving a check. And that makes a lot of sense. I'll show you why, because I'm sure many of you are thinking the same thing. Here, when we play queen to d5 instead of castling, you realize they can give this check, right? Because we're threatening checkmate, yes, but if we're giving a check, the king has to move. But that doesn't worry us, since we're still threatening checkmate, and once they move, we can capture this knight, right? What have the black pieces gained? A pawn, but now we're attacking a bishop that definitely has to retreat. And not only that, but now we're launching a tremendous attack on the enemy king. First of all, we develop our knight to f3, for example, and as we can see, all the pieces are coordinating to attack the enemy king. For example, here the most common move is c6, preparing two things: the retreat of their bishop, which isn't doing much anymore, and a possible move. d5 to open up the position a bit, since we have the king in the center. It makes a lot of sense, but they don't get there in time. The winning combination here is as follows: bishop to e3, so that we threaten checkmate. Many times the threats we make force our opponent to create weaknesses. They have to weaken themselves with which move? With g6, of course. Here, for example, f5 wouldn't work to stop the threat, because we would capture en passant and the threat would still be there, right? They have to play g6. And what does that do? When their pawns are on white squares, the black squares are left undefended, so the bishop can get in. Many of you might think bishop to h6 is a tremendous move, and it definitely is, but here we're actually helping our opponent a bit. Much better is bishop to g5, threatening the queen. We're threatening the queen, and not only that, but here we pretty much have the game won with the next move, bishop to f6. All of this is starting to sound familiar, right? After the move d5, which is the most common, we bring the queen into the attack. I'm explaining all of this so you can understand how you can win. Because if I just show you the three opening moves, then you won't know how to continue. I prefer to explain everything properly. And here we're threatening queen to h6, playing for mate. Sorry, winning with checkmate. The only move that stops it is h5. But here I'm going to let you think for 3 seconds, a wonderful move that ends up winning the game. Come on, let's see who finds it. You can pause the video if you want to try to figure it out. The best move here is the brilliant queen sacrifice. Very hard to see, my friends. Very hard to see. Queen takes h5. Obviously, they have to take the queen because otherwise we're coming in with queen to h8, checkmate. So when the queen is captured, look at this wonderful move, knight to g5, and checkmate on h7 is inevitable. The king can't move to any square. And not only that, but there's no way to give him an escape route either. So here, no matter what the black pieces do, we would simply play bishop to h7, an amazing checkmate. Of course, we just learned that by playing d4, this more aggressive line, if they captured our e4 pawn, we would come out ahead. But the correct response from black is to capture the d4 pawn. Chestiker, you can't leave without telling me how to play if they make the correct response. Alright, so here we wouldn't recapture right away. It wouldn't be a bad move, but I recommend a much better one, which is knight to f3. A much better move. Chess, stitches, you're going crazy, and now you're just giving up another pawn here. Our opponent has two extra pawns. Well, now we can get one back, right? So technically we're down a pawn. But in exchange for what? In exchange for tremendous activity. The queen is active, threatening the knight, so we have the initiative. This knight has to move. It can't be defended with d5 because we would simply capture the pawn, so it has to move. We have the bishop and the knight out, and we're going to castle on the next move. For example, if they play knight to d6, which is the most popular response to threaten our bishop, we castle short. In this situation, we have two pieces and the queen active, and we've already castled. Our opponent has all their pieces on the 8th rank, can't castle yet, and their knight is holding them back a bit. The best reaction for black seems to be knight takes c4, taking away our pair of bishops and a powerful bishop. However, at this point, we already have the game won. How do you feel about that? We've already won the game. The correct move isn't queen takes knight, which would still leave us with an advantage, but rather rook to e1, a fantastic in-between move. We check the game. How can I stop this track in 2 moves? Well, they can give up the knight, but all that would do is delay their downfall by one more move. They can play queen to e7, sacrificing the queen, a huge blunder, but bishop to e7 is also a huge blunder. Why? Because it stops defending the g7 square. Queen takes g7 is going to win the game. Remember, for now, we're down a piece. Down a piece. They've captured our knight. Even so, we're threatening the rook, and now we finish it off here with bishop to h6. And as you can see, checkmate is inevitable. What do you mean inevitable, Chesnitzer? It's well defended. No, because after queen takes f8, it's checkmate. You can't capture with the king because of the bishop. And you can't capture with the bishop because it's pinned. Thanks to our rook on e1. Notice how strong the rook's pin is. The sharpest among you may have noticed that after taking this pawn, instead of playing knight to d6, they can play knight to f6, right? Which is a very natural move and doesn't block anything at all. Don't worry, because I'm going to show you a quick plan that will always work for you. Remember these ideas well, because you'll be able to win a lot of games this way. We're going to pin this knight with this bishop, right? We pin on a queen. All right, our opponent can do anything, but the most sensible move is definitely bishop to e7, defending against this very strong pin. Otherwise, we could start exchanging these pieces, and with two doubled and isolated pawns on the f file, that wouldn't be a good idea. And now we switch plans. Knight to c3, for what purpose? Not just to bring more pieces into the attack, although that's part of it, but to castle long, my friends. Very good idea. For example, things you should know about this opening. If they attack your queen, where should you place it? If they attack your queen, you should place it on h4. Why? Because it's extremely hard to drive it out from there. They can't chase it away from any direction. Something people often try against me is h6, a move that doesn't do anything, because they're not threatening the bishop since the rook is undefended. Therefore, here a better move would be, for example, castling, right? Now, they could play h6 afterwards, couldn't they? We castle long, putting the rook on the same file as the queen, a very good move. We're in a wonderful position, and from here we're creating very strong threats. For example, bishop. d3, you don't need to memorize all of this. You just need to understand it so you can apply it in your own games. We're threatening checkmate with the queen and bishop. Basically, what we would do is bishop takes knight, removing that piece and delivering checkmate. This is the most obvious of all. How can black try to save themselves from this situation? For example, by playing h6. Why? Because now, if we trade, what would happen? They wouldn't have queen takes h7 checkmate anymore, since this pawn would be blocking it. So how do we continue? Well, in a simple way. This way, we can even sacrifice the bishop. Bishop takes h6, pawn takes h6, and queen takes h6. So now checkmate is going to be inevitable no matter what. Honestly, it doesn't matter at all what they do to us, because we're simply going to bring in all our pieces. If they pin this knight, I really don't care. I'm going to bring in the knight as well, and you won't have any way to stop this checkmate. Practical example. If they come to take our rook, all we have to do is bring in the bishop. If they capture with the knight, it's checkmate with the queen, and if they move the king, we could also checkmate in more than one way. But why make things complicated if instead of bringing in the bishop, we should think about which piece is getting in the way of checkmate? The knight. So I'm going to take it out. If you capture it, I'll checkmate you and that's it. This knight can't move away. And if they do anything else, it really doesn't matter to us, so we'll capture the knight. And when they recapture, then we can go in for checkmate. In this case, we would play queen to h7 checkmate, king to f8, and queen takes f7 checkmate. I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you like the way I explain things and all the concepts I went over, I'd really appreciate it if you gave me a like. It doesn't cost you anything at all. And it makes me really happy. If you like this board with coordinates, I'm going to make more explanatory videos using it, since I really love recording this kind of video, if you'll pardon the repetition. Also, today I recorded here, sitting at the table, so I got tired much less than usual. I was able to explain things much more clearly. I hope you really enjoyed this video, friends, and I'll see you tomorrow, as always, with another new video. Goodbye!